Are you seeking a better way to accelerate your sales, to scale your business, to live a life with no limits? Accelerate Sales Podcast features global experts who have cracked the code to recurring revenues with proven sales systems and get you on the fast track to scaling. Now let's accelerate your sales with today's episode.
Hi, I'm Paul Higgins and welcome to the Accelerate Sales Podcast, episode number 416. You're going to learn some amazing things today, but 3 is how to put yourself out of a job. He's got a brilliant plan for that. The second is how to prepare for exiting your business, and the best time to do that is now. And the third is how to get a higher multiple when you're exiting your business. For first-time listeners, if you love it, please subscribe. And if you're a regular, that's right, if you listen regularly, please leave me a review on the platform that you're listening to. I love those and truly appreciated. There's a summary of the notes in the platform you're listening to. You can get a more detailed summary at paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast. And you can also get the full transcript if you just ask. And before we go into the interview with Raj, I'd like to talk about 2 of our sponsors. One is the Cloud Consultants Collective. So it's a peer-to-peer group. It's free, where people help each other to scale their business. It's a wonderful community, and you can join that at the cloudconsultantscollective.com. And the next is SendSpark. If you're struggling to get replies, whether it's in follow-up or you're not getting comms through to your client that you'd love to, it's a brilliant video platform to help with that. It's got all the analytics and it's absolutely wonderful. And if you go to paulhigginsmentoring.com/SendSpark, you get 6 months free, which is pretty cool. So our guest today is Raj. He's a dad, a serial business founder, an owner, and a recovering attorney, if there's such a thing. He's a veteran entrepreneur, and he has worked across so many areas, including marketing and advertising, internet, and the SaaS. And he's worked for some of the biggest brands in the world at Facebook, Google, etc. He's built organizations from scratch, and he's actually exited 2 of them his own. And he also now helps people by being an investor and advisor to effectively help them to scale. And he's got 2 superpowers that are on evidence today. One is generating customer demand for his portfolio companies, the ones that he invests in. And the other is optimizing a corporate structure to keep revenue rather than sending it to the tax man, which we all love. So what I'll do now is hand you over to Raj Jha from exitscout.com. So excited to have you here, Raj.
It's great to be here, Paul.
Yeah, well, we had a conversation, it was a while ago, but it stuck with me because I think exiting an agency is a goal that a lot of you have, and you might be listening now thinking, what are the things I should be preparing for? So we'll definitely cover that. And while we talk about that, who is your ideal client at the moment? Who do you love to work with?
For me, largely it's self-funded business owners, typically doing $1 million or more in revenue. And they're looking for their companies to be more valuable both today and when they want to sell. And I think we're going to end up covering a lot of that because there's a wonderful synergy between if you start preparing for exit early, you actually are doing things that make your business better today. But in essence, those are who I work with. So I don't work with folks who have gotten venture capital funding, et cetera. It's really more either bootstrapped or friends and family. And they've gotten to this certain point and they're looking to say, okay, how do I get better today? And how do I most importantly prepare for an exit? So that's kind of what I do now. And just by way of background, I've been an attorney in the past, so I've done a bunch of M&A and have, founded and exited a couple of my own businesses. So that's kind of the context that I come to this with, having made a bunch of mistakes, both for myself and companies I've worked for, and had some successes. So I've kind of honed in on those are the people I really like to work with because they kind of fit the mold of what I did.
Yeah, and I think that's great where you talk about that $1 million mark, because I think, a lot of people, you might be at that mark at the moment and, they think, I'm too small. I'm too small to ever think about exit, right? It's, it's only for the big guys, et cetera. So, do you often see that people or looking for investors like you to go into the business, do they sometimes forget the fact that, at $1 million, it's still a good proposition for you to go into?
Well, it could be. I'll be honest and say at $1 million, you don't have a lot of options unless everything else is firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
So the point is, once you can get to $1 million in EBITDA, so if your profit gets there, okay, now you're starting to talk. But very often $1 million in revenue, you're talking, is this really just a founder's business plus a few staff or some freelancers? But you've got enough infrastructure that you can start thinking big, right? But not so much that it's going to be necessarily an easy sale. So that's in fact the time to start thinking about it. And if the correct time to start thinking about selling is now, right? If you haven't already. So even if it's 10 years down the road, 15 down the road, or even if you never want to sell, you never know what life brings and what your health might bring. As you know, Paul, that the world changes for everybody, and having a business that's set up for that is a wonderful, not only peace of mind, but makes the business better.
Yeah. Well, look, I know you've got certain, you've got your guidelines on what makes a successful investment or a successful exit. So we'll get to that in a moment. But like you said, you were, you ran your own agency. So you've walked where a lot of us have walked before. And it was specific to law firms. And obviously you got a legal background, right? Which is probably an obvious one for you. But just tell us a little bit about your learnings of running an agency. And I know that, you did exit them. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your own experience before we go into how that applies to what you do today.
Sure. So I was very intentional about picking the niche of the agency. That's not to say it didn't evolve a lot over time, but I'm, former attorney, and I was an attorney who worked on internet advertising. So I worked with Facebook and Yahoo, and those were my clients, and really working in the early days of those companies on their internet ad platform. So I kind of knew marketing, and I kind of knew law firms, and I put two together and say, okay, well, here's a market which has folks who make a decent living. So there's some money there, and their marketing is just atrocious, and they don't know what they're doing. And so I put those two and two together, and that's how I went into the niche. So the niche really helped, because when you can speak to, this is what I do, and this is who I can help, and here is my background and all my experience in that really, really helps. That's not to say that was enough. Because for the first, I would say, year and a half to 2 years, I struggled a fair amount because I was really aiming for a size of entity that was too small. I was going to be solo practitioners, and just kind of how like now I work with companies at $1 million mark. At the agency at that point, I would take someone who's making $150,000 a year, which isn't a business, right? It's a gal or a guy with an office, and that's really what it is. So I struggled for a couple of years, and probably if I had been smart at the time, probably would have shut the business down. But I'm kind of obstinate in that way. And until I went up market and I started thinking, okay, I actually need multi-partner firms, right? They need to be making $750 million a year in order to have enough budget to move the needle. That's when it started catching. And then really my biggest learning was, keep on turning up what you charge until it's embarrassing, and then keep on going. And then once they start to say no, then you might back off a little. So I went from, very low end commodity services at like $600 a month. And then I went to $1,200, then I went to $1,800, then $2,400, and then $3,200. And then I was like, okay, well, this is too short. This is taking too long. So $5,000, $7,500. And these are monthly numbers, right? $10,000, $18,000. So I just kept on going higher and higher until they were like, yeah, I'm not sure I can afford it. Okay, well, let's take up a little scope and let's redo it like this. And so I think that learning really made it into a real organization, one in which I could afford to have really high quality people doing the work. So I think that's the biggest learning on that front. And then in addition, thinking about the business as a machine in a way, and I'm sure you've heard people say this, but everything should have a standard operating procedure, and really documenting that and making sure that the team is adhering to it, and that they understand why, and that they can articulate why to each other, to the client. That's really important. So that's kind of the arc that I went on there. And throughout the sales process, really finding a buyer who wanted the entity partially for the brand value, because we had it's called Practice Alchemy. It still exists today. It's a very good brand name for any kind of professional services organization, and having kind of a really, really well-known brand with good operations that, frankly, they made better after it was acquired, because much larger, organization 10 times the size of mine, so they made it even better. Yes. But I think that's the arc that I went on there. But I'm sure you can have some follow-up questions on that.
So to obviously scale it and build it, you needed to
Mm-hmm.
be really proficient at sales and marketing. So, and often I work with a lot of agencies that, it's the plumber with the leaky tap, right? They're doing a lot of work for their clients, but they don't really do a lot of sales and marketing for themselves. And that's often why they come to me. For your experience, what really worked for you to scale the front end of the business?
Well, I think the first thing is having the mindset that is my job, right? So I had two jobs. My first job is to put myself out of a job. My second job is to market the business and really doing as much as I could. So I did a whole bunch of video marketing, essentially a bunch of YouTube kind of things, email marketing, but we were a huge proponent of paid media. So we ran Google ads, we ran LinkedIn ads, Facebook ads. So throughout the entire course of pretty much from day one, I even started on direct mail at the very beginning. Definitely a lot of paid advertising to jumpstart the business. And it actually was extremely expensive in the first few years because I was trying to figure out what worked. But paid advertising was the underpinning of everything. And that also reflects my own bias, to be honest. I'm a paid media guy. I understand it, but it happens fast. Yes. So if I'm going to do SEO for 3 years until I get somewhere, I don't get those 3 years back if it didn't work. And those 3 years to me are more expensive than $10,000 a month or what have you in paying for LinkedIn ads to get some leads that I know if it's working or not very quickly. So philosophically, I really leaned into paid media and then testing different hooks. Like, does this offer work? Does this resonating with the audience? And testing again and again. And you fail much more than you succeed. But with a testing mindset, I think that's what drove us to be able to get enough leads and enough meetings to really make it grow.
Yeah, and did that come at the expense of your drawings?
Yeah, it did. But that's an investment.
Yourself.
I mean,
yeah,
exactly. I'd rather back myself than sticking it in the market, certainly, these days. But so yeah, I definitely back myself and back the brand because that's what I was doing. And I'm not a big fan of just brand advertising, but in a niche, it's a little different because if you do something like there's a trade show and you blanket the trade show. We did a bunch of geo-targeting and we blanketed the trade show just while the trade show was in session so that people on their mobile phones would see our name, but we didn't have to buy a booth. It was actually cheaper than buying a booth, but we blanketed the entire thing. And the comment that we would get on sales calls is, I see you guys everywhere. And that's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Yeah. And did you do that in-house or did you use agencies yourself to run those paid ads?
It was a combination, mostly in-house, although in the later years, we did outsource some of it, the Google stuff, because we found a really good partner who could do that. And then we did have some help on the content side as well. I generated the content in terms of it coming out of my brain and the strategy for it, but the execution of it instead of doing in-house, because we didn't do that same kind of content for clients. So there was no point in having an in-house resource. So we did outsource pieces of that.
Yeah. And any tips like, there's a lot of agencies, you might run your own agency where you do paid, right? But there's some other people who are listening now who, might be more consulting on the sales side of it, et cetera. So they're not actually, experts at paid. Any tips on how do you pick the right agency or the right partner?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough question because it depends on your size. If you are under $1 million, I find it that you often can't afford someone who is really going to be that good. So you're kind of forced to learn it yourself. So hook or crook, get to $1 million, and then perhaps you've got enough slack in the system to afford an agency that's actually good. And I'm not disparaging anyone who's might be a great solo ads person. But the fact is, you just don't know. And, there is somewhat of a proxy of if they can charge $5,000 a month to do this and they have a bunch of clients, that's probably an indicator that, they're doing something.
Yeah. Great. So, you're sitting here and you're thinking, when's Raj going to talk about the things that I need to do to successfully exit my business, right? So let's talk about that. I know you've got sort of 12 principles or 12 guidelines that you look through. What are some of the ones that a lot of us miss when we're preparing or looking, I suppose getting our business right to have someone like you to come in and invest or acquire?
So I think the biggest thing is first a mind shift that everyone is so worried about revenue, right? And saying that, how do I get my profits up? So I'm at $2 million now, and I want to double my exit valuation. So I was thinking, so I have to be at 4 million, right? And they're very focused on that. But there's two ways to get there, because what you're ultimately paid on exit is a multiple of EBITDA. So it's your profits multiplied by a number. So you've actually got two things you can play with here. Yes, you might have to double sales to double your exit valuation, but sometimes that's the harder thing to do. And there are other things that you can do, which have to do with process and systems that you can put in place. So maybe to get to your target exit valuation, you only have to increase your EBITDA by 50%. Yes. And that's a much more attainable goal, but you're working on things like a better cash cycle. You're making sure there are no points of failure of suppliers, vendors, your staff, making sure that you're not integral to the business. These are all the kinds of things I look at, right? What's the cash cycling in the business? Is there recurring revenue? What are the points of failure? What's the market look like? Are there new offerings that are kind of going to where the market's going to be instead of where it is today? Customer loyalty. There are all of these things that if you focus on them and make it into a system or a process and work at it over time, you can actually increase your exit amount significantly more than if you're just grinding away at increasing the revenue, but it's bad revenue in a way, because all it's doing is making the organization more dependent on you or more dependent on key staff or key suppliers. So, stop digging the holes and patch all that over, and then with a solid foundation, you grow revenue. It's going to be a lot better.
Yeah, and so if I understand what you're saying, and this is what we learned when we sold our business, is that you can work as hard and have the good strategy for the EBITDA. I get that, but the multiple can differ based on a strategic purchase or based on the quality of the business. These other factors that you mentioned. So if I got that right, that basically exactly, what you want to get is a higher model, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the more that your business runs without you and is predictable, the higher the multiple will be. So you don't get predictability by you being in the middle of everything, which is usually the problem with most businesses under $3 million. The owner is in the middle of everything. Yes. And that's very often can be not just a low multiple, that can be an unsellable business.
Yes. So, and sorry, just quickly on that, because I know that you said you had to do that. And I love the analogy that, there's two things you had to do. And one was basically, fire yourself, get yourself out of a lot of it. Yeah. You've done it. You've seen a lot of other people do it. So some tips on that. So for example, I've got a client at the moment that, he is, he's a Salesforce partner. He still does some of the architecture, right? And he's trying to get his way out of it, but he hasn't got the income to get the quality of the person in, etc. So he feels like he's in a catch-22, and that's why I'm here to help him, drive his top line of the sales to be able to afford someone like you said.
Right.
But tips like what how did you go about it? How do you see other people go about it? If you're here listening to Raj at the moment thinking, God, I just don't know how to get out of delivery.
Well, there's an exercise that I do with some companies, which I'll just share with you today. I call it management by vacation. So it's super simple. All you have to do is say, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. What's going to break first? Make all the list of the stuff that's going to break. Now you got to fix all those things so you're not necessary for that. Then the next time around, I'm going to go on vacation for 1 month. Now you list all the things. Now you say 1 quarter. Now you say 1 year. Once you have fixed all of the things that would break because you are not accessible, that is the hack to knowing that you are not actually necessary. Yeah. That's revenues coming in, things are operating, cash is being produced, reports are, then you have a company that does its own thing. So my framework is management by vacation. And that's what I ask myself. It's like, well, if I'm not available and I actually wanted to take a vacation, or, if a family member is ill and I have to go and, take care of them, is my business going to be able to do this without me? And if you can assure a buyer that you are wholly unnecessary, there's two great things. Number one, you'll get a better multiple. Yes. And number two, you're not going to have an earnout where you have to continue working in the business. And that is another thing that service businesses people don't always appreciate. That in a services business, if you are so connected to the actual operation of the business, you're going to sell it and you're going to become an employee. And those are going to be the least happy 2 years of your life.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I think that's so true. And look, for us, when we sold to a Google partner, the other thing around that multiple was, yes, we had a great predictable sales process, which we built. And that's because our vendor, our partner, used to give us 80 leads a month and then it went to zero, right? So we were forced to do it. It didn't help that I was on a dialysis machine at the time. So that made it a little bit tougher. But anyway, you got to do what you got to do. But it was, what we did was did a case study on, well, what's the buyer really want to buy us for, right? Because I think so many people think about how am I going to spend the money rather than the strategy of, well, put myself in the buyer's shoes, right? And for us, the multiple advantage was that, they were a Google partner that had lots of clients with very low margins. We had a robust sales and marketing system for a higher margin product that they could run across their business. So all of a sudden, the EBIT wasn't as important. It was more around the strategic, what was the upside that they could get out of the multiple, right? Yeah. So I know that you're on the buyer side of the fence, but what should, have you got some examples where there was more value extracted from the multiple based on really understanding the buyer's position?
My own agency actually is the one that comes to mind right off the bat. In addition to folks that I've helped with this, which is very similar to yours. It was acquired by a much larger organization that was running 15% margins. I was running 40% margins. So immediately that's interesting. Now they say, oh, well, this is an inroad with a brand into an entire market segment where if we can get those kinds of margins and understand how those margins are created, right? And what kinds of engagements get those margins, and we can clone it to other specific niche marketplaces. That was the whole basis for the acquisition. So you definitely have to do that. Like you said, you were looking who's your ideal buyer, right? So I always think about it as, are you thinking about that? Are you nurturing those buyers 1 to 2 years before this ever needs to happen, if not more? Are you always nurturing the buyers and thinking about what is my strategic acquisition plan? Even if I never sell to these people, shouldn't you know anyone who's that influential in a adjacent space? And if not, perhaps you end up acquiring them, because that's something that sometimes I work with folks on as well. It's like, okay, well, you're doing really great in this niche, whether that niche be like email marketing. Let's say that they're just one kind of agency, or in a vertical like accountancy. So accountants could go into legal adjacent, right? Or the email could go into, let's say, Facebook advertising or something that is adjacent. And sometimes you can acquire another agency, combine, and just the sheer mass of it makes it worth more. So by doing this kind of market analysis and understanding who could acquire you, you're going to find all kinds of opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And look, for us, we did the same thing. It took us 2 years. And believe me, that our buyer didn't even see the opportunity when we first started engaging, right? By the end, obviously, they did. But yeah, I think that's really important. We were very strategic as to who we're after. We sort of qualified. It was like, the reverse auction. We were looking at multiple people, Google partners, and who was going to be the best fit, etc. So I think, that's great advice. And you talk about this business model, right? Because it is hard. Let's face it. You run a service business, I run a service business. They're hard, right? You might be running one and thinking, they're hard. It's a really hard gig, right? And you talk about this recurring revenue and how you could, what I'm basically asking is, how can you optimize your business model if you're running a service business at the moment?
So I think there are two things that come to mind right off the bat. Number one is recurring revenue. So if you're running a services business, the first question is, how do you make it not just project-based? Yes. Because you don't want to be spending so much time hunting every single time. It is much easier to keep a client than to get a new client. So look for the kinds of engagements that have recurring elements. So I would only take recurring business. So I would never take one-offs. So someone's like, oh, could you build a website? And, we normally think internally, okay, it's going to cost us $5,000, $7,000 to build a website. And they said, we'll write you a check for $15,000. I said, no, it doesn't matter, because what you're then doing is you're rigging your business for feast or famine. And it's hard to staff. It is hard to make the staff successful. It is hard to get consistency. And you're always pulling people off of one engagement to staff another. That's a really tough business model. So number one is recurring revenue. And number two is, how much is it a package? right? So how much can you make things into defined product or service lines so that you know when you start an engagement, what's it going to cost you in terms of resourcing and what do you need to bill out at? So I was talking with a friend of mine who runs an agency just last week, and his issue is that he's doing recurring billing. So he's got a monthly retainers, yes, but every scope is slightly different because they need slightly different things. And he's saying, well, I just wanted to keep it easy and have one price. I said, well, aren't your margins different per client? He said, yes. Well, then how can you plan, right? How can you plan if the margins are always different? And then you're going to get another client, and is that going to be a high or low margin client? And you don't know. So it's going to impact him if he sells, because the buyer's going to assume every client from now on is low margin because he can't tell me why one is and one isn't. Yes. So the more you can get discipline around that and be able to plan and say, okay, here's the 12-week onboarding of a client, and here are all the resources week by week that need to be staffed. Here's the margin I'm going to get on that. And maybe I'll kind of take it on the chin for the margin for the first 60 days just to get them involved, engaged properly. But then I should be expecting this kind of thing and always checking on the variance of that. So what is my effective billable rate per employee? What is my effective margin per employee, per service line? So you really got to get kind of neurotic about the numbers in order to do that well. And for a lot of agencies, at least in the marketing agency world, they hate that stuff. Right? They did it. They want to do the creative. They want to do client relationships. They really hate that number stuff. But that's going to be the difference between you being able to show up with financials, or someone's like, "Ooh, I want that," and it's like, "No, I'm acqui-hiring you, and you'll work for us." It's a very starkly different thing.
Yeah, and if you don't have that skill, right? So let's say you're listening to Raj and you're thinking, "I just don't have that skill. Numbers isn't my thing. It's never been my thing. I'm not going to change that." Right? What are some options? Do you get a virtual CFO? Do you put more investment in your account? Like, what are some ways that you could overcome that if numbers just aren't your thing?
Well, I had that issue in that numbers are my thing, but I didn't have any time. As I mentioned earlier, I was really focused on generating as much business for the business as possible and then getting myself out of things. So I hired a fractional COO. And one of her first tasks was to make sure that all the team members were on board and they had someone to talk to, because I was running around doing my own thing. And then it really bond with the team. And the second was to really get discipline around what are all the things we're doing for clients? Are we charging appropriately for them? What should we be charging? Do we need to change how we position and sell in order to make this consistent for the long term? So I hired a fractional COO and it worked out extremely well.
Yeah. And how did you find them? Like, where do people go to find a good fractional CFO?
That's a good question. I happen to find it by networking. I put out the feelers, and someone who came recommended by, who was it? I believe my bookkeeper was in a networking group with my fractional COO, and she's since become a friend and, really, really helped the business. So, but it is networking for that.
Yeah, and look, that's one of the reasons why I've created a community for cloud consultants, because it is that network. It's the who knows who, etc. And that's my job, is to really sit there and be the conductor of the orchestra and provide. Oh, okay, you need this. Okay, well, bang, I know this person. Right. Connect it. So that's spot on. And look, I think, and if you look at the moment, I did the top valued companies in the world at the moment, and majority of them have got a recurring revenue model, right? You look at your Amazon, your Apples, there's, yes, a lot of them are in tech, but they're also, their core fundamentals is a recurring revenue business. And to be honest, that's what, also helped us, is that we had a contract for recurring revenue, right? So we had I pushed really hard to get a contract for our region with the vendor, so that then I had a piece of paper to sell. And I think, some of the things you talked about before was, what are the, you went through, your how you get your cash cycle, your market, you go into your customer loyalty, et cetera. For me, I think it's like, how robust is your relationship with your vendor and what contracts you can get? Because as you said, you think revenue, selling the business, I got to get to this revenue. But believe me, all the due diligence, and it day to day, all the due diligence that goes around actually selling a business, all of a sudden you start to think, oh, wow. And I know you've got some brilliant resources on exit exitscout.com to find those. So instead of going through them all now, Raj will share those with you. And look, we could talk for a lot longer. There's just one more thing I want to get to before we get to the quick questions at the end. And that is around an event strategy. You spoke about a way that you can leverage events to get more clients. So if you can just take, you who's listening through that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So there's a few ways to do that. And one of the ways is to do joint events. So if you have a colleague who is in an adjacent business, in other words, they have a similar client from you, but they do not offer the same thing as you, it can often be a very powerful thing to create a joint event in which all of you invite your clients and your prospects. And so get together at a bunch of, let's say, 4 different vendors, all of which have the same client, but none of which are competitive. And you put on it can be whatever format you like these days. It'll probably be Zoom, but you can put on something with roundtables. You can interview luminaries that this particular audience would be interested in. And each one of the participants has an opportunity to show their expertise in front of a much larger pool. So it's a way to cross-pollinate your lead pools. And because it's non-competitive, it's kind of everybody wins, as long as you just have a common understanding of, is hard pitching allowed, or is this really a soft pitch kind of situation? And that's very situation dependent based on the kinds of businesses. But that can work very well. And then one cousin of that is the thought leadership roundtable.
Yeah.
And that is where we would have other folks who are we want in our network, and we get together, 12 people, roundtable lunch, and each goes around the table and discusses what they're seeing on a certain topic. So all the MC has to do is come up with who's being invited, and then what is the topic of discussion. So it could be, well, what's inflation doing to our businesses now and our supply chains? Or it might be, hiring in this time, or managing staff, or even it could be preparing for exit, right? What we talked about today, something that is universal and all those people will be interested in. So when I was running the agency for law firms, we tell them to do this. And they said that the amount of business that they got out of this just by increasing their network was huge. It's highly manual. But on the other hand, it's kind of exponential, because every time you do it, you're introduced to a whole nother group of people you wouldn't have known. And as you repeat it, it snowballs upon itself.
Yeah. And look, and at the moment, we're finding it very successful to do that virtually, which is i.e. LinkedIn, right? So if you look at all your current client base, you go and look at their connections, their mutual connections, people that they're following, and all of a sudden you'll see patterns of people that are your ideal client in there, right? So yes, I think the event space is great, but don't forget, right in front of you at the moment with LinkedIn, there's an opportunity to leverage your network a lot better, and instead of sending spammy messages out to people. So look, Raj, it's been brilliant. What you've explained is fantastic, and like I said, all the resources are at exitscout.com. I know you've got some brilliant videos. You've got over 100 videos there, and you've got some downloads. But let's go into the quick rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you some questions and get some rapid responses. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
All right.
Go ahead.
Let's rock and roll. So the first was, what are some daily sales habits that you do today to accelerate your sales?
This is going to sound remarkably mundane, but it's about calendaring things that need to be done. So I'm kind of neurotic about planning, and every Monday I've got a plan for the week, and I will actually calendar time in which things get done. And it sounds really silly, but especially as a business owner, it gets really hard. And there's always the crisis du jour, and you come in, and if the first thing you do in the day is you check your email, you're screwed. So it is really about having a time, ideally first thing in the day before you enter into anything, to finish your marketing and your sales tasks. So I would say that's it's basic, but that's kind of what works for me.
Yeah, time blocking is brilliant. The next one is for you. Where do you find information to improve your sales skills, your sales knowledge?
I have a business partner he's a colleague. He's actually the fellow who acquired my business and has since become a business partner on a number of other deals. He runs an outsourced sales and marketing organization. And because they have over 100 clients, if I ever have any question or wanted to know what's the best and the latest and the greatest, I can call him. He's got the finger on the pulse of it. So just knowing a person like that really just keeps me updated on what's working and any strategies and tactics.
Yeah, great. So at the moment, if I could grant you one wish in your business to accelerate sales, what would that be?
Really, it is being introduced to people who are great founders of companies who want to partner to grow. It's really about meeting more people with a mindset of, yes, I want to grow something to exit. Because where I come in is I'm helping them get from point A to point B. And now, whether that is with just kind of working with them on a mentorship basis or whether that's investing in the company, it's all about, if I could have a line of people who are really excited for a bigger future with their company, that to me would be a dream scenario.
Yeah, great. And, looking at what you know now, right, through all of this brilliant experience that you had, what's something you wish you had have started sooner?
Building my personal brand, I think, and which is an interesting thing because it's changed, right? Because when I had the agency, I did do a lot of personal branding, and but that's the first time I had, and that was all around being the guy who helps lawyers market. But if I had, once I sold it, I had kind of re-engaged and kind of rebranded myself to being something else, then I think that would have been beneficial. So I think even before that, and then after that period of my life where I did a bunch of personal branding, really never letting off the gas on that probably would have been a better move.
Yeah, brilliant. And we just actually did an episode on that. So if you go to 414, there's an episode on personal branding by Bob Gentle. So perfect timing. So as I said, you can get all the resources at exitscout.com. And Raj, it's been brilliant having you on the show. Thanks for sharing all your experience. And I'm sure that you'll have some members of or people that are listening to this podcast reach out to you, because what you do is really valuable to I think, to have a major lifestyle improvement, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for being on.
Great. Thanks very much, Paul.
So that was a great interview with Raj. Absolutely loved it. I love these little system of management via vacation. So go and re-listen to that and take it down. I think that's a brilliant way. I used to do that in my corporate life. I don't do it enough in my own, so I need to do that. The second is the recurring revenue model, which I'm sure you've heard before, but some of the ways that he said to approach it is fantastic. And that fractional COO, if you're doing everything and you're getting pulled from pillar to post and not spending enough time on the front end of your business, I think that's a great opportunity. And if you need someone, reach out to me, because I am creating a list of COOs, virtual fractional COOs. So I've got that for you. And whatever you liked, please share it on your LinkedIn with an image from Raj of the podcast. And he would love that. It's a nice way of thanking him. And also you can find out more at exitscout.com. The links are all in the our website, paulhigginsmentoring.com, that he did. And, if you know 1, 10, or, how many agency owners, why don't you share this great episode with them? They'll love you for it. They'll think you're a rock star. And check out some of the solo shows that I do that are specific just to cloud consultants. And don't forget about that free Slack community. If you're not in it already, you can go and join it at cloudconsultantscollective.com. Next week's guest is Andrew Mowat, and he's got a brilliant way of getting those impossible meetings in your calendar, right? He's got a fantastic platform, and you're going to love that. The last thing that I always say is please take action to accelerate your sales.
I'm fired up after today's episode. What about you? But hey, before you go, learning is just one piece of the puzzle. Now it's time to put today's strategy into action. Head over now to today's show page at paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast and share how you'll put it into action. Be sure to head over to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe, rate, and review the show. Tell me what your favorite episode is. And don't wait 1 minute more to gain access to your pulse check at paulhigginsmentoring.com. This could be the difference between struggling to get more leads and making this next quarter your best one yet.